kings and queens. Welcome to Faith Helps Podcast, and I am your host, Diamond Booth. Now, just as a disclaimer, please remember that this podcast does not replace actual therapy. So in no way does listening to this podcast mean that you are receiving therapy. And if you are experiencing a mental health emergency or safety concerns of any sort, please call 911. Now, if you need assistance getting connected with a mental health provider, you can visit my nonprofit website, www.forthekingdominc.com. There you'll find like pro bono and sliding scale mental health resources and services and all sorts of other things that can help you, especially if you're experiencing financial disparities. All right, okay, so formalities all out of the way. Last week, if you didn't tune into that episode, I really encourage you to head over to Spotify or YouTube and soon to be also Apple Podcasts and catch that episode 3, which was titled Credentials Won't Silence Insecurities. And I feel like today's topic goes right in alignment with that topic that we talked about. And today's topic is the mess of redefining. The mess of redefining, which I feel like goes hand in hand with insecurities, because a lot of times the things that are challenging us internally come from within and typically relate to our identity. And when it comes to our identity, there's so many things that factor into making us who we are and influencing who we are and how we show up in our different areas, different aspects of our lives and our different roles in our lives. And so sometimes that can get really messy when we're trying to embark on this journey of unlearning some things and taking off some identities that we don't want to carry on into our new journey. But also it can be really messy when we're trying to reintroduce ourselves and re-identify ourselves and redefine ourselves, especially when we are surrounded by situations, people, or circumstances that, keep us in the same place that we're in, even though we don't want to be there. One of my all-time favorite songs, especially when I'm working out, is Live Forever by 116. All right. It is absolutely, arguably one of the littest songs ever. I don't care what nobody say. Every single artist on that track slayed. You hear me? I don't care if you're a Christian or not. It's a banger. But anyway, one of my favorite lines in that song is when Triple E was like, second birthday, my death day was called off. That line just hits my entire heart. And for those of you who aren't familiar, when a person makes a decision to accept Christ and they get baptized and their baptism is complete or whatever, their baptism day is sometimes referred to as their second birthday, because they are reborn in Christ, and literally our death day is called off, because once we made that decision and commitment, we know that even when our physical bodies may pass away here on earth, we will receive everlasting life in heaven. As the song says, we gonna live forever, yeah. Oh, we gonna live forever, yeah. So that's what that line is referring to. Now, around the age of 7, I was baptized at my parents' church. I was always raised in church, Bible school, went to Christian school almost my whole life. And, as a kid, we don't always fully grasp the weight of what we're doing. So even though I was baptized earlier on in life, a couple years into my graduate program, I started feeling like the Holy Spirit was really moving me to get baptized again. And it was like a year straight of this just nagging internal feeling of needing to get baptized again. And so I ultimately did on July 17th, 2022. So that's my second birthday. That's the day that my death day, that I'm recognizing as my death day, getting called off, which was super, super sweet, because it was the day before my actual birthday. My actual birthday, July 18th. And it was totally unplanned, like literally. What happened was I had just left my childhood church because I just felt like it was time. and just a host of other reasons I decided to leave. And I was looking for a new church, and this was only my second time visiting my mentor's church. And while I was at the church that day, I wasn't planning on getting baptized or anything, but at the end of the service, I went up to Pastor Young. Shout out to Bowie Apostolic Ministries. And I went up to him after church and was like, hey, I've been feeling like God's been pulling me and calling me to get baptized again. And I don't know, because I was baptized at 7 and everyone's telling me, you don't need to get baptized again, blah, blah, blah. But I just can't shake this nagging feeling that's been going on for like a year, where I just feel like God or Holy Spirit has just been moving me to get baptized again. And I appreciated his response so much, because he just turned to me and was like, you know, who am I to tell you if you are or aren't hearing God? Like, if you feel like God is telling you to get baptized again, listen to that, because it's important for you to learn his voice for you. And I appreciated that validation, that's just and that reassurance so much. And he was like, if you want to get baptized again, we can do it today. I said, what? He's like, we can go right now, today. And so we did. He called up a church friend of his and orchestrated, made sure that, the baptism pool was available. It was like maybe 30 minutes away from our church. And so we drove up there. My mentor was there. A few of the other church members came, and just to be there to support and to also pray with and for me. And it was just a very transformational and monumental moment in my life. But anyways, I bring this up because that day was a major milestone for me, especially because I also associate it with redefining. Literally, the idea of baptism is that when you come up out of the water, you are a new creation, a new heart and mind with intentions to do your best and continuing on in your walk with God and turning away from sin. Now, I've seen that get so misunderstood and misused. Just because you get baptized doesn't mean you are no longer going to struggle with doing what is right. And after getting baptized, if you slip up, that doesn't mean, oh well, you must not really be serious about God and you gotta get baptized again. No. Matter of fact, funny story, when the day after I got baptized, the day of my baptism, so after I got baptized and we're all leaving the church, I was on the phone with my mentor just talking about the experience and some things that were coming up for me and all that. And while he's talking on the phone to me, I'm driving because I love commuting. My church was an hour away, so I was driving back home. And as I'm driving, there's this car that is just riding my bumper. Now, one thing I hate, and I'm still working on with the Lord, is not responding to foolishness when it comes to road rage, because my dad passed that down to me, so I'm still working on that. But this car is like right on my bumper. Both lanes around me are completely clear. I hate when someone's riding my bumper and they can clearly go around and they choose not to, and they just choose to flash their lights and all that. And this is exactly what that car was doing. So they're behind me, flashing their lights, doing all manner of sorts of foolishness. And finally, they come up beside me. I'm ignoring them. And my mentor has no idea if any of this is happening. He's just like sharing and talking about something I cannot remember at this time. But as the car goes around me, I can see them in my peripheral trying to get my attention and like flipping me off and screaming and losing her whole unholy ghost mind. And so I'm ignoring her, though my blood is literally boiling. She then pulls slightly ahead of me enough so that I can see her, like so that she's in my field of vision, and it's basically falling out of her car to make sure that I see her giving me the middle finger. And just instantaneously, my hand had a mind of its own and jumped forward to give her the middle finger. And literally as I did it, my other hand like reached out and grabbed it. Yes, so no hands was on the steering wheel at this point because I was having a whole internal battle with my flesh, literally. So I retract my middle finger. I'm like just gripping the steering wheel with so much anger. She then pulls in front of me and like tries to slam on the brakes to get me to run into the back of her. And I keep my cool, and I still didn't leave out of my lane because what I'm not going to do is be bullied. And eventually she gave up and moved on about her life. However, I share this because sometimes people think and have the misconception that baptism is like a quick fix, and that's just simply not true. You're not immediately going to turn a new leaf the second you come out of the water, and nothing is no longer ever a challenge for you. If you struggled with road rage before getting baptized, you're going to struggle with it after. It's the mindset that you are entering with. It's now that you are committed to Christ that you're starting to think about, okay, well, how am I going to represent Christ in this moment? My impulse is to give a middle finger, but I'm not going to. Or I'm going to try not to. Or maybe I roll my eyes, but I don't act up the way I typically do. And that is a gradual process, not an immediate fix. And it was funny because as that interaction was happening, I tuned back in as my mentor was saying on the phone. He was like, yeah, so just know that when you do get baptized, just because you got baptized again, if you slip up, it doesn't mean that you have to go get baptized again after the fact if you make a mistake or if you fall short. And I was like, wow, it's crazy that you just said that because, and then I told him what had just transpired as we were literally on the phone. So don't think of baptism as a quick behavioral fix. You're still going to have some work to do as you strive to be a better you and live an aligned life with Christ. And that's a lifelong journey, to be honest. So don't beat yourself up. That doesn't just apply to your faith journey, but any area of your life in which you are undergoing a change or rebirth, so to speak. Life is comprised of seasons in which some things will bloom, some things will die, and some things will change. They redefine themselves. As humans, we are constantly evolving, changing, and redefining ourselves. And sometimes it can get really messy. I want to talk to you guys today about surviving that messiness of being redefined. But I think it's important to first clarify what it means to redefine ourselves, so we're all on the same page, okay? To redefine means to define again or differently. Merriam-Webster dictionary takes it a little bit deeper, and it says to re-examine or re-evaluate, especially with a view to change. That word view being used as a noun is a scene or prospect. It is the ability to see something or to be seen from a particular place or position. So when we take these puzzle pieces and start putting them together, we get an understanding that redefining ourselves, i.e. defining ourselves again or differently, re-examining or re-evaluating ourselves, that requires us to see the change we're wanting to make, have a view of it. So in essence, redefining ourselves doesn't just simply mean re-examining, re-evaluating ourselves, and then presenting a new and improved or different version of ourselves. It also means having a clear view, or as I prefer to say, vision of what that new or improved or different version of yourself needs to look like. This is where many people get lost in messiness because they don't have a clear vision of why and what their redefining is supposed to look like. And instead, they abort their season of redefining. Now, based on my own experiences with redefining myself and the opportunities I have been honored to have in being a part of my clients' journeys as they redefine themselves, there are 3 pitfalls that I've consistently seen come up in the process of redefining. With us being in a new year, and many are feeling plagued with New Year's resolutions or starting to struggle with maintaining those resolutions, this is likely a needed and timely conversation because more than ever during this time of the year, so many of us are striving to survive redefining ourselves successfully. So today, I'm not just going to identify the 3 pitfalls that people find themselves in. I'm also going to give you guys some practical strategies for navigating and conquering them ultimately. Okay, the first pitfall I often see is lack of awareness. This is when the individual does not know that they need to enter a season of redefining, so they continue living day to day the same. Someone might say, okay, so what's the problem with that? So what? What's the problem with the just continue to live life business as usual? Maybe you don't want to go through any redefining or change. Maybe you like the life that you're living. Maybe you like the way your life is as it is. I get it. It's comfortable. That's the reason I stayed stagnant for so long. I was comfortable. Uprooting and reconstructing my life didn't appeal to me for the longest. I liked who I was, and some of the people around me at the time liked who I was too. And honestly, there's no problem with it if you want to stay mediocre. And that's not a dig, it's just facts, because choosing to stay within your comfort zone is choosing to stay at a level of mediocrity. Just call it what it is. We are humans. Humans evolve. The world around us is constantly evolving. What happens in nature when something does not evolve while their environment does? It eventually dies, or it struggles. It doesn't thrive. It struggles the entire time it's living in the environment that is constantly changing around it. So it not only is struggling, but it's not thriving to the capacity that it could be. It's not flourishing. If you don't want to thrive and flourish and you're cool living day to day as status quo, cool. This episode does not apply to you. However, if you do desire to thrive in life and not just live to make ends meet, then you're going to have to evolve. You're going to have to undergo some seasons of redefining. You can't stay the same person you were 10 years ago. That version of you can't thrive and flourish in this season of your life or the next level you're entering into. Now, what I am not saying is that you need to redefine yourself every single week, not even every single year. Redefining isn't just something you do just to do it. It's important to ask yourself, is it necessary and is it appropriate? How do you know when you need to undergo some redefining? The only way to answer that question is to re-examine or re-evaluate yourself. There goes those words again. You need to re-examine and re-evaluate yourself. How do you do that? Okay, here are 3 questions you can ask yourself. Number 1, am I actively living in or moving towards my purpose? If not, what barriers am I allowing to hinder me? What steps do I need to take to address them? Number 2, am I living true to myself? This one is deep and a bit more vast. You might need to take more than just one day to sit with this question and search yourself. Search your habits and patterns. Am I living a life that is true to myself? True to who I want to be, true to who I want to become, true to my values and beliefs. It's just you versus you, so there's no point in lying to yourself at this point. Get honest. Sometimes we revert to telling ourselves lies so we don't have to face the shame and guilt or disappointment. No, face it. Confront your shame. Confront your guilt. Confront your disappointment. Instead of trying to avoid it and lie to yourself, you should feel it. Not be consumed by it, but confront it, feel it. Shame, guilt, and disappointment is just information. They're traffic signs to redirect you. They let you know you're not on a path you want to be on or not living true to yourself. Shame, guilt, disappointment, they say reroute, recalibrate. Identify what's off and confront that thing. And you do not have to do it alone. Get into therapy, identify your accountability partners, join a small group or a support group, start journaling. Don't just talk about new habits, but write them down, set alarms, implement them. You're not always going to feel like it. You're not always going to feel like it, and you can't wait for yourself to feel like doing the things. Sometimes we're going to have to get uncomfortable. We, unfortunately, nowadays live in a microwave worshiping generation. You are not going to get everything instantaneously when and where and how you want it. And you cannot wait till you feel like it. You're going to have to get up. You doing it annoyed? That's fine. Keep doing it annoyed. Eventually it turns into a habit, and eventually it shifts from I have to do XYZ to I get to do XYZ. All right? So keep doing the work. Let's keep it moving. Number 3, the third question to ask yourself is, am I achieving the goals that I set for myself? Why or why not? Even if the answer is yes, still reflect on why. When clients come into my office and they're like, everything's going good and they're meeting their goals, I still ask why. What has been working for you? What has been helping you achieve those goals? Where has your motivation been coming from? Because knowing what is working, helping, and motivating you now might come in handy later down the road when you do hit a rough patch or face a new challenge. Pay attention to what's contributing to progress so that you can add it to your toolkit for later challenges and hurdles and goals that you seek to embrace or confront. And it doesn't always have to be something big and elaborate. It might seem like something that's not a big of a deal. For example, when I had asked a client this before, it took them a while to identify what was helping, because as most people do when asked this question, they say, I don't know. Things have just been going good. Or they say, I've just been doing well. Or I've just been feeling better. But after some time, they realized they had started doing a new skincare routine, or they started giving themselves a few more minutes to just take some deep breaths before getting out of bed in the morning. Someone might say, okay, big deal. What does a skincare routine and some deep breaths have to do with being productive and redefining yourself? Well, actually, taking care of your physical body has a lot to do with your mental and emotional health. The healthier you are physically, the healthier you will be mentally and emotionally. And the healthier you are mentally and emotionally, then the better you will function, which ultimately contributes to improved performance and execution of goals and increased motivation. So don't underestimate the so-called small changes. Don't underestimate them. So make the time to really study you. Re-examine, reevaluate yourself. And as you do that, ask yourself and reflect on these 3 questions. You'll have more clarity on where you are in your journey and where you're trying to go. If your answers to one or more of these questions that I asked was no, then you might need to sit yourself down and have a heart-to-heart with yourself about your trajectory. If you don't like where it's headed, then there's some changes you need to make. Behaviorally, interpersonally, socially, you might need to change environments or friend groups. You may need to reintroduce yourself. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is, on to the second pitfall. I know we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I believe it was necessary, and I'm hoping it was helpful. But let's keep it moving. The second pitfall I often see trip people up when it comes to redefining is lack of movement. In other words, the person finds themselves stuck in the process, unable to move forward, or they can't see the process through to completion. They get stuck in the mess of the redefining. A person can find themselves lacking movement in their redefining process or getting stuck for a variety of reasons. I've seen many people get stuck in redefining themselves and not seeing it through because of insecurities, fear of rejection, and imagined barriers. There are plenty of others, but these are the most common ones I've heard and seen most frequently. What do each of these three things have in common? Insecurities, fear of rejection, and imagined barriers. They each come from within. And anytime you're dealing with internal things, it can feel like you're being pulled all over the place, and it can literally feel like a big mess. Now, when it comes to insecurities, we can sometimes get caught up in what we think of ourselves. We pick apart ourselves in every way possible, finding every reason to disqualify ourselves and tear ourselves apart. When we allow insecurities to run the show, it's like getting stuck in a Harry Potter maze that keeps you in a never-ending cycle of doubt, anxiety, and apprehension. Insecurities, they trick us into believing that we're not smart enough to do or be better. Insecurities convince us to settle for where we are because we aren't talented enough, eloquent enough, witty enough. You fill in the blank. Insecurities pull a wool over our eyes to deceive us into believing that we have to stay at a level of stagnation and mediocrity, that our purpose, our power, and our potential is way too big for. If you ever spend some time just listening to older folks, you often hear them bring up what they regret not doing, opportunities that they wish they would have accepted, risks that they wish they would have taken. I've often heard the elderly kings and queens I used to serve as a GNA bring up how much they wish they had worried less about the opinions of others. I listen to them fantasize about who they wish they could have been and wondering what it would have been like. Their fantasies were usually followed by sharp warnings to be all you can be, young lady, or live and believe in yourself and take a chance. The thing about insecurities is you're still believing in yourself, just not believing the right things. Instead of believing in your strengths and positive attributes, with insecurities, you're believing in your flaws and inadequacies. I almost said perceived flaws and inadequacies, but no, because in reality, we all have some flaws, inadequacies, imperfections, and shortcomings. The problem is we fixate on them and feed them all of our attention, energy, and time until they're the size of a sumo wrestler, immovable, stubborn, and taking up a whole lot of internal space in your mind and heart. Then we wonder why we feel so stagnant and worn down or burdened. Feel like we aren't living up to our true selves, our full potential. It's all because we've been feeding the wrong things. Feed your strengths, positive attributes, admirable qualities, talents, and skills more than you feed your insecurities. Now, with fear of rejection, people often get hung up on what others are going to think and how others are going to feel about the changes they make. What if they don't accept me? What if I lose friends? What if I get called fake? I can count how many times I've sat with people who knew they needed to make some changes. They knew they weren't living a life in alignment with who they want to be and who they truly are. But they procrastinate making changes, or they suppress that internal pull and desire to redefine themselves and ultimately continue living a lie. Perhaps you've been known as the ratchet loud friend, the knuck if you buck friend, but deep down, you know that that's not the legacy you want to leave behind. Something about it doesn't feel true to you. You don't really like what you see when you are alone and look in that mirror. You see that you aren't living up to your full potential. That may just be an example, but I'm sure it resonates. And lastly, concerning imagined barriers, what I mean by that is sometimes we place shackles on ourselves and build barricades in our own path. We get in our own way. What does that look like? It looks like making excuses why you can't step fully into that version of yourself that you know you can be and truly are. sometimes that imagined barriers we create for ourselves might look like the thoughts that we're going to inconvenience someone. So you may feel as though if I redefine myself and that requires me to make certain changes, that's going to cause a rupture in these other relationships. Or it's going to cause challenges for me and make other people dislike me. Or it's going to make someone else uncomfortable. And sometimes we think that we need to live at a lower version of ourselves for the sake of someone else. We see this a lot in unhealthy and toxic relationships, where you have one person submitting to a degraded version of themselves for the sake of salvaging a relationship that they think they want or waiting to see change. Baby, God will never call you nor them to live as a degraded, mediocre version of yourself for a relationship that's causing fumes and destruction. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. This goes for friendships and family as well. I had a person reach out to me after the Take Territory episode because they felt as though they couldn't fully pursue their purpose right now, and they went on to further explain without giving out too many details. They basically explained that they have a lot of family and younger siblings relying on them, especially financially, which I completely understand. Especially depending on cultural values and expectations and beliefs, that feeling of responsibility can be heavy, and it does not mean that you deserve nor have to be consumed by it. There's a way to have boundaries with it. One of the first things I always look at when someone tells me that they don't have enough time for XYZ is their schedule. 9.5 times out of 10, they have way more time than they think to start working towards their purpose or a goal, even if it is seemingly small steps at a time. Those small steps add up. What they often don't realize is how they are mismanaging their time and their energy in their schedule. They don't realize how they're mismanaging their time and their energy and their effort instead of maximizing it in a healthy way. They don't usually see how they are spending and rationing out their time and energy and effort on non-essential things or things that are not fruitful. So how we are spending our time matters, and also our perception of time can be an imagined barrier, because if we are constantly saying, oh, I don't have enough time, or oh, I waited too late, or oh, I'm too old, bull, I call bull, because when did you become the God over your own life and determine how much time you had left? You can be 50 years old and feel like, oh, I'm too old to be redefining myself or starting over or starting a business, etc., etc. But whole time, you have no idea that you are actually going to live to be 80 years old. That's 30 years of time you still have. 10,957 days to be exact. You could take just 1 year out of those 30 years, which is only 365 days out of those 10,957 days, and write just one page a day, and publish a whole book, and still have 10,592 days left. Y'all better stop trying to play timekeeper and get serious about the time gifted to you in the here and now. There's actually so much more I want to say on that, but I'm gonna hold it. I see now I'm gonna have to come back to this, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep us focused on the subject at hand. These rabbit holes be getting me, y'all, so pray for your sister. Refocusing. The third pitfall I often see trip people up when it comes to redefining is lack of vision. One Bible verse that snatched my whole edges and scalp a couple years back is Proverbs 29:18. And it says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Now, there's more to this verse, and a few wise gems and warnings dropped all in it in its full context in the chapter. But for right now, I want to rest on this part here. Where there is no vision, the people perish. How can you move forward if you cannot see where you're going? You can't. You can try. We see that in the famous painting, The Blind Leading the Blind. They follow each other into a ditch. In other words, they perish because they don't have vision of where they're going. Now, does God give grace? Yes, he does. But sometimes we catch an attitude about the grace. We get mad that God allowed us to scrape our knee, not knowing that he saved us from the ditch. If it wasn't for him allowing you to trip and fall and scrape your knee, you would have kept staggering along and fell into your death, not a ditch. Not knowing that it was just a few more steps ahead had you continued going on the path and the trajectory that you are on. That's all preventable though. It's preventable when you have a vision of where it is you're headed. And that vision is a combination of us and God's instructions. I say instructions because sometimes you don't have the full clarity of the vision. You just have an idea of what's next based on the instructions God gives you. And then faith fills the gap. Habakkuk 2:2 says, write the vision and make it plain. God has a purpose for your life. If you're having trouble identifying it, first off, seek him. He's the one that created you and designed you. Secondly, look at your gifts, your talents, your interests. Look at what provokes you and inspires you, drives you, excites you. Write it down. When God gives you an instruction, write it down. I'm sure you have good memory, but write it down. You have a desire and vision for your life as well, write it down. What are you believing God for? Write it down. Post it around your spaces and your offices, your bedroom. Make it easily visible. In terms of redefining yourself, who do you feel you are called to be? And guess what? Write it down. Visualize it. Think on it daily. What changes and steps do you need to make? Write them down. That version of yourself that you want to step into, what does he or she look like? What are their characteristics? Is that version of you an outspoken center stage leader, or do they prefer to flourish behind the scenes? Are they gifted to be a support versus the one in front? You won't survive redefining if you don't even have a vision of who you want to be redefined as. Okay, so you say you don't want to be known as the gossiper, for example. Okay, but as you step out of that role, what role are you stepping into? In family systems therapy, we teach families how when you have a member of that family system remove themselves or their role in the family changes, it creates a shift in the rest of the family dynamics. And that can be very messy and devastating. Your change in role will create a shift, and sometimes that can get messy, especially if you have people that you are surrounded by that are trying to keep you put back into the role that you were playing. And if you don't have vision of who it is you're working towards becoming, you will eventually return to that default setting of the gossiper or whatever the role is that you're trying to step out of. The rest of that verse, Habakkuk 2:2 says, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. Another translation says, write it out in big block letters so that it can be read on the run. I am a huge advocate of having positive affirmations, affirming quotes, inspirational post-its, and physical reminders in your life to help you hold on to the visions you have for yourself in all areas of your life: identity, spiritual goals, career aspirations, financial goals, hopes and dreams, relationships, whatever else it is that you are pursuing and believing in and believing for. Write it down, draw it, make it visible, do a vision board. So, boom, there you have it. Lack of awareness, lack of movement, lack of vision. The 3 pitfalls that people get caught up during their process of redefining. Lack of awareness, lack of movement, and lack of vision. And each of these can be survived and conquered. Be sensitive to the timing of the season you're in, loves. Make time for self-evaluation and assessment. Ask yourself those 3 questions. Are you actively living in accordance to your purpose? Are you living true to yourself? Are you achieving the goals that you've set? Don't get crippled by insecurities, fear of rejection, and imagined barriers. Kick them to the curb and keep it moving, boo. Envision yourself becoming exactly who you know you are and can be. Write it down and speak it over yourself. This might be good encouragement, but I know encouragement isn't always enough. So here's a few additional actions I would like to submit to you as you survive, because I know you will survive, the mess of redefining, and eventually thrive and flourish in the fullness of who you are and have always been created and designed to be. I'd first like to submit to you that if you struggle to make those next steps towards redefining yourself, explore why. What's getting in your way? What are you getting hung up on? Examine what barriers are in front of you. Explore your why. And as you explore your why, be open-minded for feedback from other people, what people who are close to you and healthy in your life or insightful in your life, what they are seeing from the outside in. But explore what are you getting hung up on and why you're struggling. You can't just pray some things away. Some things need to be addressed head on. Don't be afraid of what comes up. Only acknowledge it for what it is, then decide what you want to do about it, and create a plan to implement whatever it is that you decide to do. Secondly, I highly recommend journaling your journey. Note what you feel, your emotions, your experience, the epiphanies that come to you, and what you learn along the way. This can be a therapeutic way to process what you are going through, and it improves mindfulness and self-awareness. It can also help you track your journey and gives you a record to look back on for encouragement, inspiration, and motivation in the future. And then lastly, I'd also suggest getting yourself a reliable accountability partner. Someone who you will be transparent with, because it's no point of having an accountability partner if you're just going to lie to them when you know that they are going to shake their head and give you that no if they see you living at a level below what you said that you want to become and be. So find someone who you know you will be transparent with, and the way that you identify that person is identifying someone who you know isn't going to pass judgment on you, and they seek the Lord regarding you and stands with you in the midst of the challenges, yet they also coach and cheer you on through them. Someone who calls you out in love when they see you not living true to yourself and your values. Someone who will pull you to the side and speak to the version of you that lives according to purpose, true self, and achieves the goals set. It will take some maintenance. Good ways to maintain and nurture this journey that you're on is just a few things, if I could leave this with you. Number 1, set boundaries. What does that mean? Setting boundaries is setting a limit or a fence in front of yourself. Okay, visualize that, having a fence in front of yourself. Now, if you put that fence there and someone comes up and they push the fence down and they walk over into your space anyway, that's not a boundary, that's a request. That fence serves as a request to not pass this limit, But if you don't enforce anything after they've crossed that boundary, if there's no consequence when they cross that boundary, it's not a boundary, it's a request. How do you make it a boundary? If they walk up to that fence and they go to push it down and you push it back up and then you tell them they have to leave, that's you setting a boundary. Now it's a consequence. They tested the boundary, they saw that you're going to stand firm on it, and now they have to revert back away. And the consequence is they don't get access to your time, space, and your greatness, to be quite frank. So when you're setting boundaries, it can look like if you tell your friend, hey, I don't want to talk about sexual impurity anymore when we're hanging out. And if you guys hang out and they start talking about sexual impurity and they're bringing it up, your responsibility as you set that boundary is say, hey, remember I said I don't really want to talk about that when we're hanging out. There's some things that I'm working on and I'm just not comfortable talking about that anymore. And if they continue, your responsibility is to follow up with, oh, okay, I'm now going to leave this space. I'm going to remove myself. I'm going to remove your access to me because you're not respecting my boundary. Set limits on who you're spending your time with. That's another way that you can set boundaries. Maybe you don't spend the whole weekend with that person every single weekend. Maybe you need some space. Maybe they're a distraction. Reintroduce yourself and your limits. Not just say, hey, I'm trying to become this person and this is my goal. Also, introduce your limits. I know before that I used to be cool with doing X, Y, and Z. I'm not cool with doing X, Y, and Z now. The purpose of boundaries is to protect you and your journey. Another thing that I've done, and I warn, be careful about this, is asking God to remove people. And I say be careful because he will do it. And sometimes it can be really painful and hurtful when he does that. Because sometimes the people that we aren't expecting God to remove are the people that we love and we want to stay close to, but they are actually a hindrance that we don't even realize in our life. Or it's just hard to let them go because they're your A1 since day one. But also, he's not going to keep stopping you from running back to them. When God removes someone, you also have to be willing to accept his response. If you ask him, God, remove anyone who's not healthy to me or hindering me from your perfect will in my life, and he removes them, and then you go back to fight and pull them back into your life, then God's not going to keep going back and forth with you. You have to be willing to do that self-assessment and say, okay, this is a person that isn't able to be in my life. And maybe it's not for an indefinite amount of time. Sometimes we panic because we think it's going to be forever. Sometimes when there's boundaries set between relationships and people that are no longer able to have access to us, we think that it has to be permanent. Sometimes it's just for a season. And sometimes it's not just for your benefit. Sometimes they need it too. We like to think that we're the bomb and we're the greatest, but sometimes we're the literal bomb exploding someone else's life because we won't remove ourselves. So that's with the boundaries. Number 2, have a way to track your progress, whether it's journaling, whether it's recording videos or doing vlog documentaries, whatever it is that you want to do to have a way to track your progress and look back on it for motivation and inspiration, or as reminders or as lessons to pass down in the future to loved ones. And then lastly, give yourself grace. You're not going to always get it right on the first try. This is something that's going to take a long time. It's a process. Don't get caught up in the trap of shame or guilt or disappointment in yourself. Practice forgiving yourself. God has already forgiven you. Once you ask for forgiveness, believing that you've been forgiven. And then the next part, which is the hardest that I found, is forgiving ourselves. So if you have hiccups, if you fall short, if you make a mistake, forgive yourself. It's not the end of the world. You're not perfect. And it's okay. Give yourself some grace. And until next time, remember, faith helps.